Have you ever felt a strange familiarity with something you cannot remember? Like a memory buried so deep inside you that it does not belong to this life. A feeling that whispers quietly in moments of silence, telling you that you have been here before, that you have known something greater than everything you see around you. Most people ignore it. They call it emotion, coincidence, imagination. But what if it is none of those things? What if it is a memory not of this world, but from before you were even born? Before your name existed, before your face had a form, before your parents ever held you in their arms, you were already there. Not in this world of noise and distraction, not in the timeline we measure with clocks and calendars, but in a realm beyond time, beyond space, beyond everything we can comprehend. You were a soul and you were not alone. Every human soul that has ever lived or will ever live was gathered together, no differences, no status, no wealth, no identity except one creation, standing before the one who created them, no barriers, no confusion, no doubts, only clarity, only truth. And then in that moment a question was asked, not a question of curiosity but a question of truth, a question that would define the entire purpose of existence. Allah asked, "Am I not your Lord?" And every single soul responded the same way, without hesitation, without uncertainty, without fear. They said, "Yes, we testify." Think about that for a second. Before you ever took your first breath, you already answered the most important question you will ever face. You already acknowledged your Creator. You already accepted the truth. There was no debate, no hesitation, no confusion, because in that moment you knew, not through learning, not through experience, but through direct recognition, you knew Allah in a way that cannot be replicated in this world. Now contrast that with your life today. Doubts exist, distractions surround you, faith rises and falls. Sometimes you feel close to Allah and sometimes you feel distant. Sometimes you respond to the call and sometimes you delay it. The clarity you once had feels blurred and the certainty you once possessed feels weakened. And the question is, what changed? It is not the truth that changed. It is not the promise that changed. It is you who entered a test. This world was never meant to remind you directly. It was meant to challenge you indirectly. If you remembered that moment clearly, there would be no test. There would be no choice. You would simply obey because you have seen the truth with certainty. But Allah in His wisdom placed you in a world where that memory is hidden, not erased but covered. And instead of giving you the memory, He gave you something else, your fitrah, your natural inclination toward truth. That inner voice that tells you, there is more to life than what you see, that feeling that pulls you toward something greater, that discomfort when you go too far away, that peace when you return. That is not random, that is not psychology, that is the echo of your answer. Every time you feel emptiness after chasing something that should have made you happy, that is your soul reminding you that it was not created for this. Every time you feel peace in sujood, even if your life is falling apart, that is your soul recognizing something it already knows. Every time you hear the Quran and something inside you softens, even if you do not fully understand it, that is your soul remembering a truth it once witnessed. But here is where the contrast becomes painful. In that first moment you said yes without hesitation. In this life, hesitation has become normal. You delay your prayers, you ignore reminders, you justify your actions, you negotiate with obligations, you live as if the promise was never made. And yet deep inside something never lets you fully disconnect, because your soul cannot forget even if your mind does. That is why people who seem to have everything still feel empty. That is why success without purpose feels hollow. That is why sins, no matter how enjoyable in the moment, leave a trace of regret. Because you are not just living a random life, you are living a continuation of a promise. And every single day that promise is being tested, not through grand events but through small choices. The alarm for fire goes off, you remember your commitment or you ignore it. A moment of temptation appears, you remember who you belong to or you forget. Someone wrongs you. You respond with patience or with anger. Every decision is a reflection of your answer. You are not being asked a new question. You are being asked to prove the answer you already gave. And that is what makes this life so heavy and so meaningful at the same time, because it is not about discovering the truth, it is about returning to it. It is not about learning something new, it is about remembering something old. The tragedy is not that people do not know. The tragedy is that they choose to ignore what they feel deep inside. They silence the voice, they distract themselves. They fill their lives with noise so they never have to confront the silence where that memory lives. But the silence always comes back, late at night when everything slows down, in moments of hardship when nothing else makes sense, in unexpected waves of emotion that cannot be explained. In those moments the distance between you and that original promise becomes smaller, and for a brief second you feel it again. That connection, that certainty, that truth, and then the world pulls you back again. Now contrast that with your reality today. You wake up and before your feet even touch the ground, your mind is already scattered. Messages, notifications, responsibilities, worries. Your attention is divided before your day even begins. The clarity you once had is now buried under noise. The certainty you once felt is now clouded by distractions, and slowly, without even realizing it, your priorities begin to shift. You still believe but you delay, you still know but you hesitate, you still feel but you ignore. That is how the distance begins. It does not happen all at once. It happens in small moments, a prayer missed here, a reminder ignored there, a sin justified because it feels harmless, a delay that turns into a habit that turns into a lifestyle, and before you realize it, the connection that once felt natural begins to feel distant. But even then, it never disappears completely because the promise you made was not superficial, it was rooted in truth. And truth does not vanish, it gets covered. It gets buried. It gets ignored, but it does not disappear. That is why even people who seem far away from faith still have moments that break them. Moments where everything feels empty, moments where success feels meaningless, moments where they sit alone and question everything. And what they are feeling is not confusion but recognition trying to resurface. Your soul does not accept substitutes. You can give it everything the world offers and it will still search for something more because it knows what it was created for and who it belongs to. And that is where the test becomes real, because in this world you are given the freedom to ignore that feeling, to silence it, to distract yourself from it. And for a while it works until something shakes you, a loss, a failure, a moment of fear, and in that moment all distractions lose their power and what remains is the same question you were asked before you were born, but this time it is asked through your reality. Who is your Lord, not in theory, not in belief alone, but in the way you live, in your choices, your priorities, your sacrifices. That is why guidance is not about discovering something new but about returning, peeling back the layers that have covered your fitrah. It is about reconnecting with something that was always there. That is why when someone truly turns back to Allah, feels like coming home, because your soul recognizes it, and as long as even a small part of you still feels that pull, there is still hope because your soul is still awake, still remembering, still calling you back, and one day the opportunities will stop not because you ran out of chances but because you ran out of time, and when that moment comes the test will end, the distractions will disappear, the truth will become clear again, and you will remember everything. Now imagine standing in a world where nothing distracts you from truth, no notifications pulling your attention away, no endless scrolling numbing your thoughts, no pressure to impress people, no fear of missing out, no race for status or validation, just stillness, just clarity, just you and the reality you cannot escape. That was the state of your soul when it stood before Allah. There were no layers between you and certainty, no doubts whispering in your mind, no confusion shaping your choices. You didn't need proof because you were already in the presence of truth itself. Now contrast that with your reality today. You wake up and before your feet even touch the ground, your mind is already scattered. Messages, notifications, responsibilities, worries. Your attention is divided before your day even begins. The clarity you once had is now buried under noise. The certainty you once felt is now clouded by distractions, and slowly, without even realizing it, your priorities begin to shift. You still believe but you delay, you still know but you hesitate, you still feel but you ignore. That is how the distance begins. It does not happen all at once. No one wakes up one day and decides to completely forget their creator. It happens in small moments, a prayer missed here, a reminder ignored there, a sin justified because it feels harmless, a delay that turns into a habit that turns into a lifestyle, and before you realize it, the connection that once felt natural begins to feel distant. But even then, it never disappears completely. Not when you sin, not when you struggle, but when you stop feeling the need to return, because that is when the distance becomes real. But as long as you still feel something, as long as there is even a small part of you that cares, as long as there is even a slight discomfort when you go off track, there is still hope because that means your soul is still awake, still remembering, still calling you back. The question is, will you listen or will you continue to delay, hoping that you will return later without realizing that later is never guaranteed, because one day the opportunities will stop, not because you ran out of chances but because you ran out of time, and when that moment comes the test will end, the distractions will disappear, the truth will become clear again, and you will remember everything, the moment you stood before Allah, the question you were asked, the answer you gave, and the life you lived after it. Now strip everything away from your mind for a moment, no dunya, no noise, no people, no distractions. Imagine standing at the edge of your entire existence, where everything you ever chased, worried about, or delayed suddenly becomes distant, like it never had any real control over you in the first place. In that moment nothing matters except one reality, the truth you were originally created upon. Because no matter how far a person goes, no matter how lost they become, no matter how many layers of forgetfulness cover the heart, the origin never changes. You came from a moment of absolute clarity, a moment where your existence was not yet tied to sin, regret, success, or failure, a moment where you were asked one question and you answered without hesitation, and that answer still defines you more than anything you have done since. This is what makes the human journey so unique. It is not a journey of discovering God as if he was unknown. It is a journey of returning to him after forgetting. Every struggle in your faith is not proof that you are disconnected forever. It is proof that you are in transition, between remembrance and forgetfulness, between clarity and distraction, between who you were in truth and who you became in experience. And Allah never asked you to be perfect in that journey. He never asked you to never fall. What he asks is far deeper and far more meaningful. He asks you to return again and again, every time you drift, every time you lose focus, every time you forget, because returning is the real proof that the covenant still lives inside you. Think about it, when a person truly does not care about something, they do not feel the need to come back to it. But when something still matters, even if it is ignored for a while, there is always a pull that brings them back, and that pull is not weakness, it is not coincidence, it is your original nature refusing to disappear. This is why even in the darkest moments of a person's life, when they feel completely disconnected, a single moment of sincerity can change everything. A single tear in silence, a single sincere dua when no one is watching, a single moment of honesty where the heart finally stops pretending. In that instant, years of distance can collapse into a moment of reconnection. Because Allah is not distant, it is us who move away. And the most powerful truth in all of this is that the door never closes, not as long as you are alive, not as long as you can still breathe, still think, still feel. Every second is another chance to respond correctly to the question you were already asked once before time began. Am I not your Lord? And every act of faith, every prayer, every sincere return is a way of saying again, yes, I still remember. But one day the test will end, not gradually, not symbolically, completely, and when it ends the veils will be lifted, the distractions will disappear, the illusions of permanence will collapse, and what remains will not be confusion but clarity so absolute that no denial will be possible. And in that moment every soul will understand the weight of what it once answered and what it chose to do after that answer. So the real question was never about whether you knew the truth, it was never about whether you heard the reminders, it was never even about how many times you fell or rose. The real question has always been simple: when you forget, do you return? Because the story of Mīthāq-e-Alast is not just about a moment before life, it is about how you live every moment after it. And now, in this very moment, you are still inside that answer.